Let us pray. Dear Lord, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Before the start of today's session of Parliament, we ask your blessing on the members of this chamber and all who support their work. May they be led by your Spirit in the decisions they make. Grant them your peace as they steady themselves amid the pressures of persistent problems and challenges. Throughout this day and week, may they do their best for their fellow citizens as they remember the words of our anthem. The Lord has been the people's guide for past 300 years. And with him still on the people's side, we have no doubts or fears. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the President. Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. Orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 4. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, the Appropriation Bill 2022.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that Your Honour do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that the Speaker do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Who's Chairman Shagan?
This House is now.
I was saying that he could do his presentation here first, and then ask for permission to join. Right? Yeah, I not in all those words, but I can. this one. I think it's this House of Standing Finance Committee. I can call it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Head 92, Ministry of Energy and Business Development, in the amount of $39,483,647.
Mr. Chairman, if it pleases you, I would request permission to join my team downstairs for the presentation of Head 92 of the estimates. At the same time, craving your indulgence, sir, to have the Honourable Member for St. James South join me in her capacity as Minister in the Ministry.
Permission is granted. Permission is granted.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Chairman, I am not sure if you can hear me, and I would be grateful if you would signal your ability to do so.
Honourable Minister, you may proceed. Just to remind you that you have 10 minutes to make your opening presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will do my best to condense all those things that I wanted to say within 10 minutes. Mr. Chairman, perhaps it is only proper for me to begin by recognizing that this is the first opportunity that I have had since being returned to this place by my constituents to thank them for the reinvestment of confidence in me. And so I begin on this journey during this particular term of office with their blessing and I recommit myself to, on their behalf, continue to fight as diligently as I possibly can for the improvement of the quality of lives of the people of Barbados. As fate would have it, sir, the ministry that I have returned to has been expanded to now include that which was the Ministry of International Business, or the Division of International Business in the ministry as it then was. And so we are now in the Ministry of Energy and Business Development. And we meet at this particular juncture, Mr. Chairman, at a somewhat awkward time in the context of global affairs. And I should perhaps say a few words in that context. As I speak to you, sir, it is common knowledge that eastern Ukraine has been invaded by Russia. Europe sits on the precipice of what may well be the largest land conflict that we have seen since World War II. And the fact of the matter is, sir, that there's a certain geopolitical significance to this development. From our perspective, that significance is not necessarily located within the context of military demonstration of power. But ours, sir, has to be a concern about the diplomacy of development and the agenda of development. And there's obviously going to be an impact on the developmental agenda as it relates to small island developing states, even on this other side of the world. The inventories in Europe are low when it comes to natural gas at the moment. The shortage of supply comparatively of gas in Europe will present a situation in which there is a limited flexibility for them to increase volumes. Equally, oil supplies have been increased by OPEC, the oil producing economies of the world, in November of last year. And so we are in a state of affairs, sir, where the global scenario is very delicately poised with respect to the prices of energy. As recently as this morning, I would have consulted the prices which are now published globally, and it would suggest that Brent North Sea crude has increased by 3%, and that there was an initial shock with respect to the natural gas prices, but they have subsequently stabilized by about 10 o'clock this morning. The fact of the matter is, sir, that this is obviously a very fluid situation, and we have to continue to monitor it from our perspective. And that perspective is quite clearly that Barbados is an energy importing country. Part of what these estimates are structured to do is to accelerate the process for us to get from being highly dependent on fossil fuels, as we now are, to a point where we use the natural sunshine, the natural wind, in order to drive our energy consumption in our homes and in our offices and our places of public administration and work generally. The fact of the matter is, sir, that what is taking place in Europe will see a major pipeline become a center of influence, the Nord Stream pipeline. Not two, as the paper publishes it, but one is the one of greatest significance to us, because that is the one that is finished and functional. It gives Russia tremendous influence over Eastern and Central Europe, and the flow of natural gas through that subsea pipeline, being the longest pipeline that there is in the world going subsea. There is 55 million metric, what's the word I'm looking for? 55, yes, of gas flowing through that pipeline. And obviously it creates a certain situation of significance because of Russia's ability to manipulate not only prices, but the economic well-being of countries which are deeply reliant on natural gas in Europe. And the consequential knock-on will be something that we have to monitor carefully. As it now stands, it is not a time for panic. The United States Eastern Seaboard, the Henry Hub prices are showing some stability, and in fact there is a lot of daylight in terms of price differential between what natural gas is sourced at in the United States and what is happening in Europe. but there will inevitably be some degree of difficulty for us to face for the very simple fact that where cheaper gas can be sourced, it will be purchased. And therefore, small economies like ours, which have a smaller demand for the natural gas, will be less prioritized than the larger economies with a larger demand, because there will simply be a point at which people will go where the money is. And with the best wishes in the world, Barbados's demand does not allow for us to have that kind of impact. We have, however, to do a number of things which we have begun to do, and I'm quite happy to elaborate on them. I know you've only given me 10 minutes in the introduction phase of this discussion, sir, but the perforation of some of our pre-existing wells, which have been fallen into a state of desuetude, is something that we are doing with the assistance of a team from Trinidad and Tobago, and we anticipate that we will be able to ensure that we drive up the production of gas in Barbados, oil in Barbados, by about 200 barrels. I'm not able to speak at this stage personally to the extent at which we might be able to accelerate the production of gas, but I believe that I have a very technically competent team sitting here with me who will be happy to engage on that matter. So it is a moment at which we have to be very vigilant about our energy sector, and we have to become very focused, or even more focused than we were before, on accelerating the delivery of renewables and renewable energy licenses, and a lot of work has been done in that regard already. And as I said, I'm very happy to go into greater detail on that, and would wish to signal my undying indebtedness to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, who in her previous capacity as a Minister responsible for town and country planning, which we must work with in the context of delivering energy licenses, enabled us to come to a very rationalized and more accelerated framework within which those licenses could be delivered. And all of you have heard the advertisements now on the radio and on television about energy licenses, because we have a new pilot project in place where we believe we can deliver within a period of 6 weeks, notwithstanding any challenges that might come up at town planning level. Mr. Chairman, the business development side of this ministry is also equally important, and perhaps I could be a little bit more upbeat about that. The business development side of the ministry touches international business, and first and foremost, I must say to you that we anticipated that we would by now have gone through the on-site inspection with respect to the OECD's placing us on a grey list. I want to assure the public that everything that needed to have been done with respect to our domestic activity to make sure that whether it is at the Financial Services Commission, the Revenue Authority, or wherever else concerns may have been raised and red flags, we had done those things that we needed to do. All of the due diligence has been done. What has not been done, however, is for the OECD's Global Forum representatives to come here, as they were anticipated to do in January of this year, in order to do the on-site inspection. That on-site inspection, not having taken place, is now going to take place, as I understand it, during the month of April, I believe the 11th of April, and we're happy to elaborate a little bit more on that when the opportunity arises. Suffice to say that they did not come because borders in France were closed due to COVID restrictions, and I have indicated to the Director of International Business, and he has in turn directed to the attention of the OECD Barbados's desire to dispense with this matter as quickly as possible, and quite frankly, sir, our unhappiness that we are dealing in a virtual world and in a virtual space very often, but we still have to treat to a question of physical presence for an inspection, which, if it does not take place, has serious consequences for the reputation of this country. And it cannot and will not be that Barbados's reputation is tarnished as a result of inspectors not being able to come here, because that is no fault of ours. The reputational hit, however, will be ours, and that is a very candid conversation we've had to have with that level of authority. With regard to the question of commerce and small business, which is the other component of the ministry, sir, let me say to you that I am in a happier mood today than I would have been when I sat before you this time last year, because we were still coming out of a period of pause to the economy, and the major concern was business interruption financing. At this point, sir, the economy has reopened. We have removed the restrictive curfew. We have seen the youngsters going back to school. International travel of a commercial nature has resumed in large measure. And I think you have heard the words of satisfaction being uttered from the lips of those people in the business community.
Honourable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Ask you to pause. You have now actually approached your time for wrapping up.
Oh, okay, fine.
So.
I note it, sir, and thank you. And so therefore, in closing, sir, I would simply say this, that there is much that we would be happy to engage the honourable members of the House on with respect to the vital sector of small business development in Barbados. There are a number of interesting pieces of legislation which have come before this House. The vending bill is one of them. The liquor license regime is another, which are now at a stage where they have to be operationalized. It impacts on every member of Parliament's constituents in a very personal and real way. I've written to you, sir, and to all of our colleagues on the question of vending zones. And I want to say, sir, that with me again is a very competent team of individuals who will be able to walk us through a number of the issues which are related to micro and small business development in Barbados. I'm obliged, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Honourable members, the floor is now open for questions to the Minister and his team. Please note that you are allowed 3 minutes. Minister, could you first move that the head stand park, please?
Oh, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that head 92 stand park. 92? 92.
Thank you. Honourable Ministers, please note that the floor is now open for questions to the Minister. And be aware that you may speak for 3 minutes at any one time on a particular subject, and you will be allowed 3 supplementary questions in that regard.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank the Honourable Minister for his introduction, and also to applaud the efforts of the members of his ministry as well for being able to advance the cause not only of business and business development, but also in relation to the government's thrust towards a renewable energy Barbados. I want to kind of start where the Minister ended in relation to the National Vending Act that would have been passed recently. As he rightly said, it does impact on a number of our constituents. St. Michael's Southeast is no different. There are lots of people who are interested in vending, especially in this environment of the pandemic. Many people have now turned to doing things at home or even going on the road to play their trade. And I would just want the Minister to perhaps elaborate, and the team to elaborate on what are the plans specifically, not only to the highways, but also to community vending as well, and the opportunities that will arise from the new vending legislation.
I want to thank the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister for the question. The reality is, Mr. Chairman, that the legislation contemplates the creation of vending zones across Barbados. And as I had started to indicate, as you signaled to me that we had come to that point where I could go no further and remain faithful to the rules, the process is now at the execution phase. That execution phase has a number of component parts to it. One of them has been, as I suggested, the need for us to get input from the wide cross-section of Barbadian people And in this particular case, I have begun by reaching out to the members of Parliament, each and every one of you, with a view to identifying places in your constituencies which you would wish to see as being areas that could be developed in the future as vending zones. Above and beyond that, there are obviously some areas where there is already a proliferation of the vending activity taking place. One of those theaters of activity is along the ABC Highway, and the cabinet paper has now been prepared, which will take to cabinet a set of recommendations for a number of sites where we will now be getting cabinets or seeking to get cabinets blessing formal imprimatur for us to be able to create vending zones along that corridor of the country. That would be a first stop. A second stop then would be for us to have the identified places within the communities of Barbados recommended not only by MPs but also coming out of some of the suggestions that would have been made to us when we had our public consultation in the closing stages of the vending bills being assessed by Parliament. Mr. Chairman, I want to be very frank with you. I see this as an opportunity for us not to go at a minimal level, but on a broad-based level, so that in as many communities as possible in Barbados, we have an appropriate facility, and that we can choose those facilities by broad-based consultation and input, so that we can make sure that this class of business person is no longer discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. It is vitally important, I believe, that we recognize that these people are all working in a manner that earns them an honest day's living, but they very often are working in circumstances that cry out for amelioration and improvement. I am extremely uncomfortable and unhappy as a Barbadian that I live in a 20th century in which we have people whose workplace does not allow them access to running water or bathroom facilities. That has to be improved, and I've signaled that to the House when I piloted the vending bill. Equally, one of the advantages that we now will have is to create vending zones that allow for us to make sure that our vendors are brought into the 21st century so that they can access a sale via the use of the IT technological platforms. I am one of those who, like the minister in the Ministry of Finance, would be happiest when I can go and buy my coconut water and be able to use my cell phone in order to pay for it. And this type of transaction is possible across many parts of the world, but it is not yet possible in Barbados today. And I feel that what we now owe to our people is an obligation to make sure that we allow them to benefit from those business facilitating types of opportunity that will empower them. It is obviously something that we understate, but it is a reality. If I am walking with cash every single day and I have to work from 4 morning until after sunset in the night, and I'm working by myself, I become a relatively easy target for those people who may be ne'er-do-wells in the society. And you don't want that. You want to make sure that people are able to comfortably do their living, minimize the reliance on cash, but at the same time, make sure that they don't lose sales. Again, for those people who are tourists coming to Barbados, very often they may be told before they even get off a ship or a plane to be cautious about walking about with sums of cash. We're all told that when we travel. But the reality is, Mr. Chairman, the lived reality and the experience of these people who are vending is that unless they are able to use technological platforms at their various sites of business across the island, then each and every one of them stands to lose a sale when the tour bus passes, or when the visitor passes in a rental car and sees the craft and said, I like it, it's beautiful, I want to purchase, but I don't have cash on me. And this is something that we have to correct, and that is part of what the vending zone opportunity does. Honourable Member, I think that the process now before us and before the Cabinet will be to identify and to roll out as fast as is possible a number of these sites, which will be properly structured to facilitate, as I said, the basic amenities of running water and bathroom facilities and appropriate shelter, etc., from the elements, but at the same time to do it in a way that allows for the access to technological platforms. It will, in some cases, come at a greater cost than others. Part of the discussion I've had with the Prime Minister is that, especially along the highway, we would be able to begin by using those pieces of land which are government owned already, and therefore you don't have an acquisition cost. You just have a cost of making the zone functional. I have, in the last term, walked that highway on a number of occasions now, and on the last instance with P.S. Cummins from your ministry, Deputy Prime Minister, and we identified 8 possible points along that highway where we felt would be a good place of departure for a variety of types of vending. And that is really what the substance of the Cabinet paper will be now presenting to us. We completed that exercise, I think it was either late November or early December last year, and we are now going to go to Cabinet with the fruits of that labor in a new term of government to ask for Cabinet's blessing that we can proceed there as a first point of departure before we then break into the rest of the country.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. And I believe all Barbadians, particularly those involved in vending, will welcome the opportunity to be able to participate at that level in further entrepreneurial activities across the island. I'm also concerned as well about the trust loans. Many of us have had the benefit of a number of our constituents being involved in the trust loans program. It has been one of the fundamental pillars of this administration, and I just would like you to perhaps update us as to where we are, and certainly to provide an explanation as to where we are going, because there's still lots of young people in particular who are interested in getting onto the trust loan program, and I think that we need to hear an update as it relates to the success, if there are challenges, are the persons delinquent in repaying, particularly in light of the pandemic. How is the ministry actually supporting through these estimates a number of these businesses to be able to ensure that we can come out of this pandemic with a different energy being brought to small business in this country?
Honourable Member, if you don't mind at all, and with the blessing of the Chair, I would want to invite Minister in the ministry to just say a few words on this matter of the vending before I go into the question of the trust loan. She has signaled to me that she wanted to make an input at that point.
Honourable Member, your request will be granted shortly, but just be reminded, as we will ask, that you would introduce your team after the actual intervention by the Honourable Member for St. James Central, St. James South, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister. I just wanted to add that in relation to the issue of the vending zones, Minister would have shared that the technology will be something that will transform how they do business, and we believe that this is something that is going to help them to really move to a global level when it comes to vending. But in order to support them in being the very best that they can be globally and to turn vending into a career that people want to engage in, not because they don't have anything else to do, but because it's a passion. There will be access, for example, to training, and through the BNSI, the establishment of the quality policy for Barbados to help every single sector in Barbados be able to operate to the highest possible quality standard. This is part of what the ministry will be doing in the Business Development Division. And in addition to this, the financial literacy training will help our vendors to be able to be successful in making a living, because they'll be able to conduct the financial affairs in such a way that vending is something that is profitable and not something that they drop the moment they get another job. So this is part of the transformation that will be undertaken in the ministry. This is something that the minister, the Honourable member for St. James Central, has been given essential leadership to, and the team is eager and ready to work to bring the transformation, not only to vending, but to small business development right across this country. I'm obliged to, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I am mindful of your request that I introduce the full team. You may not be able to see it, but I think you can know that I see what you can see on screen. There's a significant amount of people here with me, sir. So just so that I make sure that I do not omit anyone, I have asked for the full list to be compiled, and once it is done, then we will be able to present you with the names and the posts held by everybody who is present across the ministry's representation at this point. But in the interim, sir, if you don't mind, I would just go on to answer the question that was put with regard to the trust loan department. And I believe that the CEO of the trust loan department, Mr. Jerry Amos, is present. He does not have a microphone in front of him, but I'm going to ask that someone switches places so as to allow him to have a microphone that he may expand and elaborate a little bit. While that happens, however, let me just say a few things. The trust loan department has been the victim of some very unfortunate types of slur for political purposes, no doubt, but it has been a success story. And again, we have to be very careful and guarded, in my estimation, about how we, in public life, make glib comments, especially when those comments are born out of a lack of respect for a certain class of the society. Let me be very candid with you, Deputy Prime Minister. I do not believe for a second that the discussion about whether or not people would pay back the money would be raised if a company like Goddard Enterprises was seeking to access the funding. However, when you go to a black man who has little or no collateral, come from a humble village somewhere in Barbados, it seems to be a matter of comfort for some people who have a level of angst in their bosom to be able to cast this type of slur very loosely. What the trust fund history has shown in the last 3.5 years of its existence is that, quite to the contrary, people have borrowed and people have been working hard to pay back, and have in fact been paying back. And not only have they been paying back, but they come back and borrow again in order to broaden the scope and the nature of their enterprise. I have benefited from being taken on tours to some of the businesses, which are really success stories. Yesterday, in one of the planning meetings that I had for this exercise, I was called upon to recall the fact that there is a lady who had a business where she was just doing massages. Today, she is doing massages and making body oils and body lotions, and is part of the tourism sector. South Coast Hotels directing their people to her, and has weathered the tempest of the pandemic, and has people from overseas soliciting her body scrubs and so on, so that they can source them here and have them exported to America or wherever else they come from. This is a reality of the way in which we are seeing a growth trajectory coming from the Trust Loan Fund. The other very interesting thing I've done is to sit down and look, and I quite frankly did this during the election campaign, because as you go from constituency to constituency, it was quite possible to see through the Trust Loan Fund who were the MPs that were agitating for a lot of work to be done on the ground on behalf of their people. And some of you who would have heard me speak would have heard me say this. There are some constituencies where we have had a couple thousand loans, and you have employment generated for a couple thousand people. It is an interesting thing that this has been the pillar upon which poor people have been able to stand and survive in most difficult of times, when we had a pandemic in which large companies were unable to survive, in some cases sending home several people. There was a turn in the direction, as you quite rightly say, to self-employment. And that self-employment story has, once again in history, pointed us in the direction of the resilience of the Barbadian people and the dedication of poor people to pay their debts, notwithstanding the slurs of those who would say to the contrary. I say that not just in defense of the trust fund program, but in defense of what it has been able to stir in the belly of the country, so that today it is beyond any dispute and question that there are clusters of activity which have been created out of the trust fund business, the micro business program, where you're seeing enhanced marketability for our people and enhanced and more efficient product development and product services. And that cluster program, which I'm going to ask Mr. Amos to speak to very shortly, also is now identifiable across a plurality of sectors. So that, for example, if you're interested in wines, there is a wines cluster in Barbados where there are people who begin in their house by making wines, who are now expanding from the house to the garage, or in some cases a little bit further, and who are actually exporting wines out of Barbados. Similarly, with tourism type related activities, similarly with agribusiness related activity, there are a number of clusters which have been growing steadily across this country and are being nurtured by deliberate programs of the trust fund. Equally, as Minister Husbands just pointed out, there is a component of this which is very developmental, and part of the hand holding that we are dedicated to doing is, by virtue of the funding given in these estimates, we dedicate a portion of that to reinvest in assisting people to better manage their businesses. Part of the better management and understanding and navigation of the challenges and pitfalls of the business environment is the financial literacy program, and it is now impossible to get a loan through the trust fund without going through some element of financial literacy training. And that financial literacy training enriches the beneficiary of that training because they are better skilled in understanding issues which are critical, and which, frankly speaking, if we could get a follow-up question, I'm going to beg somebody to ask us or allow us to talk a little bit about managing debt in Barbados, because dealing with debt is a critical issue. I say this to this country as minister responsible for business development. Our capacity of our people to deal with debt in a realistic and a sensible way is something that, if we are not careful with, it will cripple this society. Managing debt, succession planning. We celebrated yesterday a company which comes from European extraction, Barbadian society. They have come to 100 years, and we laud that. That's what we want. We want businesses to be around for a long period of time. But ask yourselves how many black businesses, how many businesses coming out of an African extraction have been around for that period of time. And I wager that you will be hard-pressed to find any that get up to that 100-degree mark. And the reality is that that cannot be something we are content with. But we will never get there if we don't have our business people being trained in issues such as succession planning. And even before you get there, you have to be able to cost your product and cost your service correctly so that you survive and that you don't price yourself out of the market, or that you don't underprice either, because both of them can be fatal to a business. So there's a lot that is going on by way of the financial literacy training, and as I said, that is an area where I hope we can elaborate further. And equally, I re-emphasize my concern about the issues of debt and the desirability for us to be able to have today a discussion on the matter of dealing with debt. But at this point, Mr. Chairman, I would invite Mr. Jerry Amos to take the floor.
Good morning to the members of Parliament. Good morning to Mr. Chairman, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for your question. Just an update on the Barbados Trust Fund Limited. To date, we have done just over 4,067 loans to a tune of $18.5 million. It would be noticed within the last year that we would have only done 730 loans, but this is a direct result of the COVID environment.
Sir, before you move on, would you kindly introduce yourself? Give your name, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Jerry Amos, General Manager, Barbados Trust Fund Limited. As, just to continue, within the last year, we'd have done just over 730 loans with $3.5 million. This was as a direct result of the COVID environment. Our strategic plan going forward would be for 2022-2023. We had outlined that we'd have done 1,200 loans within this year. However, due to budget constraints, we have revised that, and we will look to spend just over $4 million this year on financing of loans. Within the communities, we have set up a plan to go back to our community engagement, where we're going into the communities to do training within communities, community to community, and we are especially paying attention to the youth this time around, and we have engaged some persons coming out to Barbados Youth Advanced Corps with their farming program, and we are hoping to have at least 100 of those persons within this financial year accessing loans. As it relates to the payment of loans, we would have recognized that after February of 2020, there was some downturn in the payments of loans, and that was also because of the impact of COVID. Over the last couple of months, as things has reopened, we realized that payments have steadily improved. What we did, however, in interim is we realized that businesses were really struggling, and we took a program on to actually reschedule those loans to have the debt forgive up to date and bring these people back to a level playing field and reschedule their loans. Persons were indeed happy to have that ease and that burden lifted. Because mentally, I think that was taking a toll on a number of our clients. As we progress going forward, what we intend to do is have our clusters more active. We recognize that within the last year, we had to cut back on some of our plans because the financing was not there in order to execute. However, we did push ahead strong with our wine cluster, and we were able to get those persons up to par with the standards required, have the labels done, and we were able to get some of our clients into supermarkets throughout Barbados. What we've done is that we have held some pop-ups where we could expose the winemakers, and we are also looking at linkages so we can help these winemakers to actually produce a better product. In the training for the winemakers, we engaged some international winemakers from France and England to actually share some of their ideas with our local winemakers, and that significantly improved their product. Another cluster that we are working hard with is our digital cluster, and we are hoping that the digital cluster is spread across all of our clusters in order to enhance and empower the things that they do. Our labeling, all of our labeling and all of our designs are being done within our digital cluster. And we don't only want to do it for our clients, but we want to spread it across all the micro businesses throughout Barbados as a support arm. In our agriculture sector, again, we have some sessions with our agriculture cluster that was put on hold after we did some initial site visits, and the advent of COVID, we decided that we would just put that one on hold until we could get back out onto the farms to visit the farmers, to get some ideas from the farmers and bring it together. What we are hoping that our digital cluster could put together some software that we could actually keep an inventory of all of the products that we have throughout the farm, our farmers in our portfolio, and then we could actually target markets that we could actually sell to. And we are looking at areas like the school meals department, hospital, and other areas within government that we could have our cluster working through and having sales coming out to those markets. Coming up, we have some events. We try to look for things that we're going to do that would not have significant costs attached to it. and allow us then to promote our businesses. It's interested to hear about the vending policy and the vending zones, because we have a plan in place that we'll actually have some routes throughout the island that we want to engage the tourism market with, where we would actually plan some tours to take the tour buses, taxis, hired cars throughout these routes, and we have our clients placed at strategic positions so we can make stops at points of interest and have some sales generated. What we do recognize, however, is that when a tourist lands to Barbados, that tourist at the time may not necessarily purchase a product, but that tourist may have a need to purchase that product. So what we have done is that we have worked with one of our clients with, it's called Omniverse, it's an Amazon-like portal, and we will have our clients on that portal, so when the tourists go back to their location, they can still order a product from off that portal. Working with that, we also intend to work with UPS so we can have a shipping agreement, and we are looking to work with a local company here in Barbados, but with ties to Nigeria and New York, to have a mobile wallet in place so that persons can do cross-border activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Manager. Mr. Chairman, I have compiled that list for you. It reads as follows. Francine Blackman, Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of, or Division of Business Development and Commerce. Permanent Secretary, Andrew Gittins, Division of Energy. Permanent Secretary, Acting Jennifer Hunt, Division of International Business. Mr. Bertram Johnson, Director, Acting Commerce Consumer Affairs. Ms. Tamisha Rochester, Registrar, Acting Corporate Affairs Intellectual Property Office. Mr. Anderson Cumberbatch, Chief Business Development Officer. Kevin Hunt, Director of International Business. Mr. James Brown, CEO, National Oil Company Limited. Mrs. Esther Springer, Supervisor of Insolvency. Mr. Jamar White, Director of Natural Resources in the Ministry of Energy. Michelle Smith, General Manager, Acting in National Petroleum Corporation. Jazeel Wilcher, Assistant Accountant, Ministry of Energy. Rosalind Griffith, Project Officer, Ministry of Energy. Ron Blaze, Project Accountant, Ministry of Energy. Sanjean Watkins Diang, Deputy Director, International Business Acting. Esther Lord Graham, General Manager, Fund Access. Marsha Atherley Akichi, CEO, Acting of the Fair Trade Commission. And Mr. Hayden Ryan, Director of the Barbados National Standards Institute. You just heard from Mr. Jerry Amos, who is the General Manager of the Barbados Trust Fund Limited.
Minister, thank you very much, and thank you to Mr. Amos for the update. I'm going to let the others who I see, there are a few others know with questions, so I'm going to pass over to them to get the ball going. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you ministers and to the team as well. My first question I actually just got, having perused social media, so I have two other questions, but there seems to be some lack of understanding, Minister Simmons, between your conversation in relation to Ukraine and Russia and what will happen in Barbados in relation to oil prices and so on, because the comments from a lot of persons in relation to the news that was carried before seem to suggest that there is a limited understanding of the potential impact on Barbados. So if you could explain that in greater detail, or have one of your team members explain it in greater detail so persons could appreciate that this is not a political ploy, that this is a very serious reality, and the consequential impacts on other issues as well. May I ask my other two questions, Minister? So the Chair, please.
You may proceed.
Okay, that's the first. The other question is in relation to the BNSA and the Barbados National Standards Institute and the work that they're doing. I know that we would have done a lot of work together in relation to establishing standards for the plastics industry and other things. But for 2.1 million, I feel Barbadians need to know what the BNSA is doing. And in relation to why it is necessary for us to have these standards as we seek to become a modern country, and the challenge that it has now in relation to not having standards across a number of areas and a number of sectors. And then finally, on the electronic single window and the $3+ million given for it, we've been talking about this electronic single window for a while. And where are we with the electronic single window? What difference will that make, again, in relation to understanding trade and the supply chains and the various problems that we may face with disruptions in the supply chain? And what benefits will redound to Barbados for getting the electronic single window? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And perhaps I could begin with the first question. I can only say that which I've said before. We are an energy importing country at the moment. The reason why we have a 2030 target set, which is by most people's calculations a very ambitious target, but it is a real issue for us to move this country from a state of complete reliance on the importation of fossil fuels to a state when we can run our homes, our businesses, etc., our industry by renewable energy. The logic behind that, I think, is or should be very clear. Whenever there is a noise that breaks out, traditionally, in the context of an energy discussion, it is a noise that occurs somewhere in the Persian Gulf. It has nothing to do with Barbados. But the reality is that it has everything to do with the prices of the product that Barbados must source on the open market. In this particular instance, the Ukraine is on the other side of the earth, as is Russia. But the consequences will be felt here and right across the Caribbean. The reason being that we are importers of energy. We are importers of oil, we are importers of natural gas in large measure. Yes, Barbados does produce some amount of natural gas, but the fact of the matter is we went through a period in this country where there was no reinvestment in a drilling program or an exploratory program. So that to the extent that we would have had natural gas and be comfortable about the provision of natural gas levels in 1980, we can no longer be that comfortable. The fact of the matter is that 30% of that which we consume in Barbados today in terms of natural gas is produced locally. The rest of it is sourced externally. And the fact that we have to source it externally obviously means that we have to pay for it. Once Europe is plunged into the difficulties and tensions associated with what may be a military conflict, you will find that there are threats to disrupt the pipeline which serves most of the Eastern Europe, which flows from Russia. Russia is a major exporter of natural gas and therefore has significant influence over there and over the energy sector in Eastern Europe. Equally, there may be responses and probably will be responses by way of retaliatory measures coming from the United States and coming from the North American Treaty Organization, North Atlantic Treaty Organization members. Whatever those responses are, they're all likely collectively to have the impact of causing greater uncertainty in the energy space. We are at a stage in the calendar where this is still winter time over there. And in winter time, those folks need to burn more gas because they need to keep themselves warm. So there's a tremendous demand for an entity that is, first of all, limited in supply at this particular moment because production levels globally are not very high. There's very little elbow room to increase supplies of gas globally. And equally, at this particular time, there is a massive tension which is going to cause uncertainty about the energy market, and therefore prices will start to trend upwards. As I've indicated to you, that began as recently as yesterday. The expectation is that this may settle to some extent because of the fact that on the other side of the earth in the United States of America, there is not that tension. But there is also another reality we have to face. If Germany or Poland or Czechoslovakia or whoever else needs to purchase natural gas at a cheaper price than they can find it for in Europe, then they go to the United States or some similar entity and they purchase quantities that we cannot compete with. That which they will purchase for a daily supply might be what we might want for 2 or 3 months. And I think that might be ambitious to expect that that is the ratio. So that the truth is that the suppliers will go where the money is. And it is very difficult for Barbados, therefore, to just sit comfortably by and watch this happen, because those people who sell natural gas are not saying, oh, we're going to provision a little piece here for Barbados because we like Bajans, or that we like to come to Barbados, crop over, or any of those sentimental things. This is about dollars and cents, and the money will follow the demand. And the demand in Europe is going to be increasingly high in circumstances which are increasingly difficult for the Europeans, but the European demand naturally is far larger than that which Barbados is. I don't know that I could put it any more simply for the people you are following on social media, or who are following us on social media. But that is the reality that we've confronted. It is critical for us because of another reason. Our productive sectors really and truly have a reliance on natural gas here as well. And to the extent that we can blunt the impact of the price increases, then we ease the pain in the pocket of those people who have to run businesses in Barbados. Similarly, there is an obligation for us to ease the pain in the households of this country as best we can. I think everybody is aware that there are commercial rates applied to natural gas in Barbados that are not experienced by those people who have natural gas in their home. But we can't maintain that differential if we continue in the circumstances that we're in without looking at what options exist for us to improve the situation. Part of the immediate response has been that there is a team of people who are on the island now and will be here for about 3 weeks to do the perforation of local wells, which will see us being able to extract from those wells which are really dying or dead, that which may still exist within them. It is anticipated across about 11 such wells that we should be able to see some increase in the output of oil. Mr. James Brown and Ms. Michelle Smith are here, and I will invite them to be able to elaborate further if you care to, Minister. But the reality is that we are at a stage where we are trying now to look at whatever options are before us. Part of the options before us are obviously the efficiencies within which we operate the National Oil Company and the National Petroleum Corporation. Much has been taken for granted over the years, in the same way that we did not mount a new drilling exploration type of exercise for decades. I think it is equally true, or at least a decade, I think it is equally true that we have to now sit down and look at the internal operations of both of these companies in order to make sure that we are accessing as many economies as is possible. That work has already begun, and it will continue apace, completely independently of the situation in the Ukraine. It is a fact that the National Oil Company and the National Petroleum Corporation have already begun to have mutual assistance services, so that they have started to harmonize that which they do at a management level, instead of having, for example, one set of accountants at work in one company and another set at another, that we merge that so as to create greater efficiency. Wherever there's a possibility of trimming costs, we are looking at doing that. But those things are comparatively small to the larger issue that we are confronting, which is that the country has to brace itself for what is quite likely going to be a period of shock as a result of the challenges which are being experienced in Eastern Europe. And that is not to say that Barbados will be alone in this regard. Unless you are an energy producing country, which we are not, then you are going to be a country which is going to have to brace itself for this kind of challenge. As I said before, it is not a signal to panic, but it's a signal for us now to be sensible. I think that one of the conversations that we have never had in this country seriously is a conversation about conservation. School is reopened. Children are now going back to school. On the street where I live, there are children who are going to the same school, but their parents are taking them to that school in the family car, so that you have 4 different cars on the street where I live taking 4 different children to the same school. Is that practical? Is that the best and most efficient way that we can do it in Barbados? Or do we come to a point where we have to start to discuss how better we can carpool and share resources? These are conversations that we have to have. It is a process that I think the whole country must engage in. Yes, it is a difficult thing to have that conversation at the same time as you're saying to your next door neighbor that you have to be 3 feet from them and wear a mask when you're around them and all the other things that the pandemic has foisted upon us. But believe you me, carpooling is taking place in other parts of the world in spite of there being a pandemic too. And it is really a question of Barbados now accepting that we, yes, are a beautiful island state, but we do not live in splendid isolation from the realities of the rest of the world. I don't know, Minister, if I need to go any more deeply into that, but if I do, please feel free to signal, and I will have the folks from the National Oil Company and the National Petroleum Corporation speak to the issue. I wanted to invite Mr. Hayden Ryan to speak to you on the question on standards. Let me just introduce Mr. Ryan. He is the Director acting for the Barbados National Standards Institute. It is my judgment that the National Standards Institute is perhaps now one of the most important of the entities in the jigsaw puzzle that makes up the Barbados economy. Again, very understated in its importance, and one of the things that Barbadians have omitted to do during the last decades of our existence is to take this question of standards seriously. We are at a point where we are no longer just reliant on tourism or, as we were before, agriculture. We now must have access to the world stage with regard to every type of business. It must be the ambition of every business person to grow their business as far as it can go. And if it can reach export level, then that must be your ambition. All will not be able to be exported. All services, all suppliers of services will not be able to go across border. All suppliers or producers of goods will not go across the border. But wherever it is possible, then this country must have a foreign exchange earning agenda. And if we do not have a foreign exchange earning agenda, then we start to shoot ourselves in the foot. And the double-digit growth that the Ministry of Finance has asked us to focus on cannot and will not take place. To get to the stage where we have that foreign exchange earning, we have to be able to export. Whether we're exporting goods or whether we're exporting services, then it has to be done in accordance with certain standards and certain best practices. Those best practices have to be identified and they have to be benchmarked, and then we have to walk our people through the process of how we reach that standard in every sector and in every sphere of economic activity in the country. It therefore means, for argument's sake, Minister, that the water sports operator in your constituency or in mine who has a jet ski but does not have a life preserver which is in good condition must be in a position where he can offer a service that ensures that his client is going to be wearing a life preserver that is in good condition, lest the person falls into the water and mishap befalls that individual and the negative hit to the reputation of the service provider, or if it is a tourist, the reputation to the country becomes something that we now have to fight against. In similar vein, those people who are multi-million-dollar contractors who are building large highways must do it in accordance with best practices and specifications. And the inputs that they use must be in accordance with certain internationally accepted standards. And the BNSI must be at the centerpiece of helping us to flesh out all of these standards. Now, I want to be very frank with this House. A cost accounting approach to the way in which we budget on an issue which is as fundamental to our development as this cannot be the way of the future. There is much that the BNSI needs to do in order to get its house in order. I will grant you that. But equally, there's much that the BNSI has the potential to do, and alone in this country has the capacity to do, that we need to make sure it can do if it is that we are going to be able to get to the level of foreign exchange earning capacity in multiple areas of activity that we are trying to get to. And it therefore means that there has to be an engagement about building out a quality infrastructure. When I say quality infrastructure, I'm talking about standards across the board, and that quality infrastructure is something that every practitioner of commercial activity in Barbados understands how he or she fits into. I will say this, and I hope that the message becomes very clear. When I became minister, Mr. Hayden Ryan sat down with me to give me the briefing, and that was just over a year ago. And I discovered then that the BNSI had approximately 40 active clients. At the same time, I was very mindful of the fact that I had received a briefing from the small business unit in my ministry, which tells me that they have about 9,000 to 10,000 small businesses active in Barbados. How then does an entity which is as fundamental to building out our export platform have only 40 clients? It means that there is a gulf in terms of contact and in terms of the influence that the BNSI must exercise over this economy's future and those businesses which are operating within the economy. And that gulf has to be bridged. And in my judgment, I must speak to the country as a business development minister should speak. If we are going to be successful, then the best practices have to be identified, and we have to lift our game irrespective of who you are, where you are, what you're doing. You have to lift your game because it is the only way that we are going to be competitive. Even if you're not exporting your service or your good, the truth of the matter is people are buying your service and buying your goods, and those people are not necessarily only Barbadian. They may be from next door in Trinidad and Tobago. They may be from outside of Barbados who come here as a visitor. But the visitor's experience is something that says a lot about the country. So if the visitor comes here and spends his or her money and gets a raw deal, that visit has a takeaway, which is very negative. If the Barbadian feels that he's getting a raw deal when he does business with you, then that negative experience ultimately leads to your doors being closed, because more and more of the negative publicity hurts the business's chance of survival. So this standards thing is a very real issue, and I think it has long been understated, and the time has really come when, if we are going to be part of the big game, if we're going to seriously now make a lived reality out of the efforts that we have made for connecting Barbados to the African continent, if we're going to make a lived reality out of connecting Barbados to the Saudi Arabia capital, if we are going to make a lived reality out of all the treaties that we've set up between Barbados and Latin America, which are supposed to be commercially oriented trade in goods and trade in services treaties, but which are very underutilized. If you're going to really transform this now into money-making activity for our people, then our people have to be introduced to the best practices in every sphere of activity, and they must be encouraged and assisted to rise to that level. And with that, with that sharing of my thinking on the matter, I would ask Mr. Ryan, please, to treat to the issue.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ministers and colleagues. And I'd like to thank my minister for quite a passionate introduction to the importance of the work that we do. But in addition, Hayden Rind, Acting Director of the Barbados National Standards Institution. So in addition to the protection of consumers, which the Barbados National Standards Institution has as one of its main priorities, we're also focused on the facilitation of trade, as well as increasing the competitiveness, as Minister spoke on, for businesses and for industry. Now, it's no secret that Barbados has high costs of inputs. We have relatively high labor costs. We're really too small to benefit from economies of scale. So what strategy can we comfortably go forward with as a country to be competitive? And the only strategy that makes sense is one of quality. So we understand that the solution to the economic challenges, like Minister spoke on, in Barbados lies in part with enhancing the industrial and also the export activity. So we also believe that this is only possible if the quality of goods that we produce and if the quality of the services that we produce is improved, but not just improved, to meet international standards. And that's how we remain cost competitive in both the national and or export markets. So quality really is our best competitive strategy. Now, this desired quality for goods and services can only be achieved by enhancing what we like to call the national quality infrastructure that Minister detailed. BNSI, we are one of the key agencies for facilitating the development of this national quality infrastructure. And again, this is in order to produce quality goods and quality services. So a little more of the intimacy of BNSI as it relates to the national quality infrastructure. We develop standards, and that's one that everyone is aware of. We develop the standards, the priority standards for the country are identified. What standards can offer real solutions to some of the problems or some of the challenges that we're facing. We have to ensure that that process is internationally recognized. So there's a process of transparency, impartiality. We have to make sure that we are accountable. People at BNSI, the technical team alone do not develop standards. It's a consensus process by which we have technical committees with balanced stakeholders across the country for each and every standard that we're delivering. So you could understand that there are heavy resource demands, even as it comes to the development of standards. We also have to ensure that the process for technical regulations as a country are managed and the process is in keeping with good regulatory practices. This makes us compliant with the agreements that we've signed. We've signed on WTO, TBT agreements specifically, and we have to be in compliance with these agreements when we develop our technical regulations in country. And that's where standards has a great input as well. So to echo what the minister said, standards in every business development activity and conversation is critical. I'll give you an example. We spend a lot of time with the agro-processors and the food sector in terms of our advice and our advocacy for standards. And you may have a very good food product. You may have a product that's liked by many and you're interested in the export market, so you get your first order. It's packaged nicely, it's labeled beautifully, you know, everything seems attractive and international. And you can have that product rejected at the port of entry for something as small and technical as the font size of your label, in terms of the lettering on your label, being less than 1.6 millimeters according to the lowercase o in the alphabet. So how else would you have known of this very technical, one might say minute detail, which is in keeping not just with the labeling standards in Barbados, but our standard is in keeping with the international standard as well. So your entire marketing strategy, your entire plan to export and expand your business crashes down. Why? Because you weren't aware that the size of your font on your label had to be of a particular size in order to meet the standard. And that's an example. And there are many where, again, to support the agro sector, you have, your surfaces need to be clean to standards, your utensils, your ingredients fit for human consumption. We have a conversation in Barbados now really where the non-communicable diseases are on the rise. And BNSI is instrumental in making sure that there's adequate labeling so that we counter the incidences of non-communicable diseases. Metrology comes into play where the weight of your food product as you package it or the volumes need to be accurate, and you need to demonstrate that it's accurate in order to penetrate markets. So really every entrepreneur, every small or micro business, every established business needs to have a quality management system in place, as small as it may be or as exhaustive as it may be, which is guided by standards and in keeping with international standards. So we're pleased to report that in the last 18 months we've published 48 standards, Minister. Standards essential to supporting the renewable energy sector, standards in support of our energy efficient standard agreements and labeling, and that's going to come into main focus this year in terms of energy labeling. The BNSI already has procured equipment which would enable us to have that very precise labeling capability for renewable energy systems. It's a specific discipline. We support and we've published standards through the CARICOM process for refrigerators, air conditioners, the compact fluorescent lights that we're dealing with, LEDs, all of these areas that really support our country's development need in tandem to have a voice and the support of standards. So that we have many other areas which are works in progress, including measures to reduce the spread of COVID. And this is in the tourism industry, an industry which we long to see rebound and do well. We're in full support with our standards development process for the Barbados National Energy Policy 2019, and the implementation plan for that policy has many activities for which the BNSI participates. Minister Humphrey mentioned the support that we've given to him in the past with the Disposable Plastic Ban Act, and we were able to do so, and we continue to do so. So standards for tourism and related services. Minister mentioned the jet ski, but the whole gamut of tourism services. We have standards developed which increases the competitiveness, and that's the point, of that industry. An upcoming sector with the medicinal cannabis industry, and we have a Medicinal Cannabis Act 2019. Of course, full support is given to the license authority there. It's a new area for Barbados, and we have to support the development of that sector through standards. The Inefficient Lighting Bill 2020, there's a lot of our work program to develop standards to make sure that the implementation, again, is in keeping with international standards. And that's standards development. But there's another pillar, as it were, for...
Sir, you may now should proceed to conclude your response.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just quickly, the other pillars would include testing. We have, thankfully, to Minister Strawn, received at last year's process monies where we were able to to establish international capabilities at the BNSI. If you're building and you're doing a small building project, a home, it could be a large project, you can bring your blocks to us to make sure that they're according to international standards and the strength are such that you have quality products. And you can't tell strength by just looking at material. But we've now procured very expensive equipment to make sure that across all sectors, we are at least at the basic level, providing that support. Now, the conversation about funding, I had a look at the International Standards report for economic growth as it relates to standards. And it was interesting to see that Canada did research to show that their GDP grew by 17.4% because of the implementation across Canada with standards. Similarly, UK 28.4%, France 23.8%.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. You have exceeded your time allotted.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Minister.
Well, thank you, Chair. That was an extremely thorough, though unfinished, response. But the third question was in relation to the single window, and I don't want that to be missed, please.
No, Minister, I wanted to treat to the question of the electronic single window as well. The electronic single window obviously is part of the World Trade Organization's facilitation of trade agreement, focusing on harmonization and facilitation of international trade. The specifics of the electronic single window, as it is now housed in and will be operationalized through the ministry, I'm going to ask the Permanent Secretary to speak to, as it is one of the special projects, if you will, which the ministry is implementing. P.S. Blackman.
Thank you, Minister. And thank you, Minister Humphrey, for the question on the single window. Right. This is one of the ministries and government critical pieces of infrastructure to support the ease of doing business in Barbados, and certainly to improve the efficiencies across a number of agencies that work across the border in terms of providing approvals for the importation or even exportation of goods. This electronic window will facilitate. The ministry is currently, last year in 2021, we signed off on the agreement with UNCTAD, who are the consultants working with us to introduce this single window. That contract was signed in October during the UNCTAD conference held here in Barbados. And we are well on the way now. We are also, at this point in time, we have the officers as well as the accommodation that we have identified to have the project unit located so that we can continue to advance the implementation. Part of the work this year will see us onboarding 12 agencies that work across the border, and 4 of them will first be engaged in a pilot to make sure that we iron out all of the kinks when we come to implementation, and then the remaining 8 then will be done certainly by the end of the financial year. But the country stands to benefit critically from this single window, because it will certainly improve the level of efficiency and speed for which we would respond to the private sector, reducing the time it would take for one decision to be made with respect to the importation or having to clear a container from the port. So it allows for the scheduling, better scheduling of appointments between, for instance, the Ministry of Agriculture or persons from my own Department of Commerce who may all have to collectively provide a decision in order to clear one product through customs. This will now help that process, reduce the time, and make it far more efficient to the benefit, certainly, of the private sector and that too of government. So this really would improve to a very large degree the way how we operate and doing business with government, which we are all eager, certainly in the private sector, is quite eager to see this completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we proceed to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, just let me give you a gentle reminder. The Minister has 5 minutes to respond to any question that is posed. All other persons, members of his team, have approximately 3 minutes to respond to any questions which they are asked to respond to. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first occasion on which I am speaking in this chamber in this new parliamentary term. So even though we are in committee, I do wish to officially thank the good people of St. Michael South Central for the confidence that they continue to place in me to represent them. And I intend, as always, to give it my best. I want to start, I have 3 questions to put to the Honourable Minister and his team. This ministry is fundamental. It is a bread and butter ministry for growth in this country. No pressure, Minister, but there are big expectations here. Let me first start with what you mentioned in your opening, the energy licensing process, and I thank you for acknowledging our partnership in that work, and I see that it is already bearing fruit, so I offer you and your team congratulations on that, and I expect that we'll see it reflected in the growth numbers as we come forward. But I want to ask you specifically, and for the benefit of the team, I'm talking about Program 114 in the estimate subprogram 0455, which makes reference to the Smart Energy Fund. Now, this is a program that is meant to help, according to your own information, Minister, encourage local investment in energy projects, increasing the number of shareholders and so on. I would suggest that it is not just about increasing the number of shareholders, but giving thought and energy and effort to the composition of shareholding to make sure that what we regrettably term ordinary Barbadians, although we are all ordinary, can have a stake in the growth of the sector. I want to ask you first, Minister, and then if the chair will allow, I will come back with the other 2 questions after he answers. What is the actual scope for local ownership in this sector? I recall that there's meant to be a benchmark that says each new project must reflect 30% local, I believe it was actually local or CARICOM ownership. I want to know to what extent the Smart Energy Fund or any other program in these estimates is really making an effort to go beyond the actual licensing process and getting it through in 6 weeks, but also to making sure that it does not, this work does not just continue to concentrate wealth in the hands of those who already have. This is one of the areas for economic enfranchisement. And I understand that we are looking at having people have solar PVs on their roofs and having passive income in that way, but how are we going beyond that to make sure that Barbadians are investing in this sector in a way that is meaningful?
Thank you for the question, Honourable Member. I think that you are directing our attention to a very important matter. Yes, you are right. The intention is that we would have the at a minimum a 30% participation in the broad allocation of licenses. The methodology of our doing so is something that has to unfold, I suppose. A more dedicated approach has to unfold over the passage of time. You are well aware that the Prime Minister would have indicated a preference that we would be earmarking certain areas of activity for investment participation on behalf of certain government agencies, for example, the Waterworks Department. Then we have regional institutions like University of the West Indies. We would have been thinking along the lines of trying to lift off of the government's back, for want of a better way of putting it, off the government central budget, the burden of carrying the energy-related aspect of that which is transpiring. But there has to be, beyond that, a way in which we better engage the average Barbadian, as we put it, in terms of buying into and investing in the energy sector. Now, as I said to you, this I think is going to evolve over a period of time. One of the ways that it has started to evolve is the way that we are seeing now with respect to housing developments, where houses which are being built not by everybody, but by certain agencies in Barbados, are coming with an arrangement that allows for solar PV to be part of the way that the house pays for not only its energy, but pays for itself. I believe that as we go forward, especially once we have the battery and storage policy settled, and part of the challenge that we are facing right now is that you're talking to me at a time when we're still, to some extent, in a state of transformation. So we are implementing PV. We have begun to identify places where offshore wind could work, and at least one or two locations onshore where it could potentially work without causing undue disruption to Barbadian community. But we have not yet settled the critical, and in my view, the most important aspect of this process, which is the battery storage aspect. And in the battery storage aspect, we will have much smaller, if you want, for want of a better way of putting it, much smaller generation space required, because a battery can be the size of the table I'm at here right now. But therefore you do not need to have as much land usage. But critical to the investment in the battery storage sector will be participation by a wide swath of the Barbadian community. My thinking is that part of this process must include, and you were in cabinet when we went originally with a paper that would have seen us building a funding arrangement with the credit union movement at the center of it, so that the National Oil Company, for argument's sake, which must now find new revenue streams, would transition itself into being an energy company as opposed to an oil and gas based company, and that part of what they would be doing would be providing the PV to that segment of the Barbadian society which has traditionally been overlooked in this business. Much of the initial effort for photovoltaics in Barbados has gone in the direction of the upper middle class and the upper class of this country. Not so for the people in your constituency in Carrington Village, for example, Honourable Member. And to correct that so as to avoid us being in a situation where we have a divide in terms of the technology and the benefits that can be derived from the technology, it is necessary for us to have an arrangement that harnesses access on one hand and make sure that there's participation in the process by those institutions that are sufficiently capitalized as to carry and represent the wider Barbadian community. My feeling is that the credit union movement is one such institution, and in that regard it is enshrined now in the manifesto of the government that we will be building that partnership between the credit union movement and entities which are involved in the installation, so that the working class community of Barbados would be able to access low-income loans, or low-income communities would be able to access low-interest loans, so that they would be in a position to invest in the photovoltaics. Beyond that, there are other areas where I think we have to also harness the activity and the participation. I am able to say to you that not just the credit union movement, but the labor movement has also expressed an interest. There is a project which is going on at Mangrove where the Barbados Workers Union has an interest in a significant investment. And again, they would be coming to the table representing, as they do, the labor movement, or a substantial part of the labor movement in Barbados. Again, we have seen a number of churches, for argument's sake, being involved in the process, seeking and obtaining licenses for the investment. That speaks to the PV side. As I said to you, I believe that once we get into the battery storage side, it opens a plethora of other opportunities for, again, another cross-section of the Barbadian community, forming consortiums as business people, forming associations and syndicates to participate at the level of the average person like you and I, Honourable Minister, who might be seeking to make an investment somewhere in the sector. I don't know that I could sit here and say to you that there's an exhaustive list of possibilities. I would be happy to concede, or I'd be willing to concede, not happy, I think I have to concede, that there has not been a dedicated, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but a dedicated way of saying these are the 4, 5, or 6 areas where we are going to bring along the Barbadian community. And the reason why that has not happened, quite frankly, is because there has been an almost organic approach to this, whereby you have the labor movement taking a stake of its own accord without having been carried to the table. You have the credit union movement recognizing very early that there are a number of opportunities here representing the people that they represent and wanting to be at the table. You have ordinary Barbadians coming together to form their associations as business partnerships, coming to be at the table. And so the market has in many ways gone ahead of the central planning. I'm not sure if that adequately answers your question, but that is to outline the state of play as it is right now.
Thank you, Minister, for your transparency and your frankness on the matter, and having conceded, as you did, that there is work to be done in this year of these estimates. I hope you're suggesting that. I hope that we can see that, because this is a sector, and I don't think it is by chance that it is tied with small business and business development, because this is one of the sectors in which we had said that economic enfranchisement must happen. And I'm glad to then that has not been taken off the table, and that effort will be made to have that dedicated work done. I have 2 questions related to the same program, Program 40, which has to do with direction and policy formulation, Minister, in your estimates. I can pose them together because I don't want to delay too much. The first has to do with your subprogram 491, which is Kpis. And I heard in the introductions that Ms. Rochester is there with you. I know that Kpis has done a lot of work, really on the technical side, has engaged some help to make sure that their online platform is working and so on. I have long held, though, that tech solutions on their own will not address the issues related to starting a business and other doing business matters in this country. My question is as follows: to what extent can we expect to see public KPIs, publicly shared key performance indicators, that the public will be able to hold Kpis and the ministry accountable for, benchmarks that have to do with how soon people can expect their business to be done in their engagement with Kpis. Minister, I think that sometimes in this work of development, it is important to change your vantage point, as I have recently changed mine, and now having to engage with Kpis in a different capacity as someone working with a company. I have to confess that my vantage point has caused me to see some other gaps. And so I think one of the things that is important is not just to say we are modernizing through computerized systems, because clearly that is not enough. How will we be able to see and know and track and measure that Kpis is in its modernization, is responding to these gaps that remain? That's the first question. The second question has to do with your subprogram 461, business development. And it includes grants in support of the Small Business Association, grants to MSMEs to help with business development, and so on. But let me put the question as quickly as I can this way. We talk about SMEs, and in this place we often talk about the small man as if the small man is supposed to remain small. I think that the only way that growth is going to happen in this sector is if we understand that we have to move from small to larger. We have to be able to identify high growth companies that are based on innovation that we can support. Because right now we have two ends of the spectrum in business in this country. One is very small, often just involved in retail and buying and selling and so on. And then the other is large, big business that has for generations controlled the wealth. What is in the middle? I know that the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited is in another ministry, and I don't want to presume to help or to suggest a reorganization of the government for how it does its business. But I really think that we need to be able to bring together these various parts of business development so that we're not just working on helping the small man and essentially keeping the small man small, but identifying those high growth companies. What is going to transform the landscape for growth and productivity in Barbados? How are we going to identify a program for getting in the middle? Not just on one side, you have small, 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 and then on the other you have huge, and then in between, there's an economic enfranchisement gap. And I want to know the extent to which there is a plan to do that work, to perhaps work with the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited, which is the country's development bank, to get that sector moving, to identify companies that can be high growth, that can really trigger a boom in growth in the corporate sector in this country. So those two questions. Thank you, Minister.
Honourable Member, I want to thank you for the questions, and the latter one I will treat to immediately, and I will ask PS Jennifer Hunton and the Registrar of Corporate Affairs to answer the second one, which really turns more on the steps that we are taking to better monitor our performance within the corporate affairs. The SBDC network, Minister, is a concept which is, I think, comes out of the United States of America originally, the Small Business Development Center Network. We have attempted to adopt it in Barbados. As I understand it, it would have been introduced here some years ago. She who sits next to me now as permanent secretary in that aspect, in that division of the ministry, would have been the officer who would have been in the early stages charged with the responsibility of bringing it to Barbados. We have had a meeting on this matter as recently as last week, Honourable Member, and PS Blackman would tell you that the way it functions now is not the SBDC network, the Small Business Development Center network, that she envisaged when it was brought here by her. The fact of the matter is that we have identified what I think I can fairly call a few deficiencies that I'm going to be very candid with the House about and with the country about. First of all, it is necessary for us to have a network that works from end to end. And this ministry is now perhaps almost perfectly structured to deal with that end-to-end approach to a seamless movement of businesses from micro through the stage of being small, through the stage of being medium, through the stage of being able to access and maintain an export level platform. And to accept that you do not actually have to be a large business to reach an export level platform, because there are medium and small businesses which are exporting and doing so successfully. That then introduces the question of the development services that must be part of that SBDC process. You were treated today to an intervention by Mr. Jerry Amos from the Barbados Trust Fund Limited. That Trust Fund Limited provides a set of business development services. Equally, Fund Access, which is more catered towards a medium-sized type of loan facility, also offers a number of business development services. And I use that phrase, business development services, to generally try to capture, for those who are hearing me, the concept of what some just loosely call hand-holding. You want to make sure that the business person or persons, and in the case of micro businesses and small businesses especially, this is very important. You want to make sure that the persons who are running the business have the time to do that, that the marketing that needs to be done in order to understand how their segment of the market is performing, assess how competitors are performing against them, understand how they may better structure a marketing plan or marketing program to better penetrate the market that they're in, that there is somebody who is acting in a consultative capacity to help guide them through those waters. Equally, there may be many people who are in small micro businesses that have issues of a legal or tax or whatever type, and they need to have professional services to guide them through those waters. There may be legal services, accounting services, as I said before, marketing, and quite frankly, even human resource management type assistance. So those are the kind of business development services that have to be offered. At the same time, there is the indispensable requirement of making sure that businesses are able to access funding, and that the funding windows work in such a way that if a business is stumbling as a result of circumstances that may be beyond its control, for example, the pandemic, that, as you heard Mr. Amos speak today, that restructuring is structured in a tailor-made fashion, not a one-size-fits-all, but sit down with the people who are in question before you now and say, business A needs this type of approach to a restructuring program or refinancing of the debt, so that they're able then to pick up and move on again. And that is really the suite of approaches that we are looking at with the SBDC network. Now, the interesting point that you make, Minister, is that missing from that is the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. And at this particular point, quite frankly, I think that we have to reach out to the EGFL and have them become, as they were initially anticipated to be, more a part of this process. Because, as you quite rightly say, it is the country's development bank. And it is at that higher level that very often we have seen people being prepared from micro to go and hold their hand through the process to get to small and medium. But then when they now have to attain and maintain that export level platform, there is a little bit of a disconnect. The other thing that the SBDC network should be doing, and to some extent is doing, is maintaining a relationship with clients so that you understand the performance of the business as it has moved from stage to stage, and you can treat to the challenges that the business has had. So that as a small business moves from being small and going into a more medium category, what have been the challenges that it faced internally? How has it overcome those challenges? When it goes from one funding window to another, especially those which are structured through government, where there are categories of financial assistance that are offered for different types of business, you want to be able to transfer from client portfolio to the new entity, that new entity fitting into that client portfolio,
a clear understanding of where and how that business has benefited from funding assistance before, and what were the issues, if any, that arose, et cetera, et cetera. That network is supposed to be a developmental network. Minister, the truth of the matter is, we are now at the point where we are trying to rationalize the approach. I have issued PS Blackman, I think, how much was it, PS? It was 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I told PS Blackman that I really wanted a sit-down to take place now with all of the key players who have a number of... Okay, fine. I didn't realize the 5 minutes have gone so fast. But sit down with a number of key players who have a number of inputs to make in this matter, so that we can better rationalize the process and make sure that we're able to deliver on it in the way that it was intended to be delivered. Time has not been kind to me in this regard, Honourable Minister, because there's much that I think we need to say about this SBDC issue. I do not know, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow Minister Husbands to address us on this matter. My time haven't expired.
Yes, Honourable Member.
I am indebted to you, sir, Minister Husband.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much, Chair. Yes, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central, it really is a very exciting time in the ministry, because there are a number of initiatives that will be launched that would be of great assistance to help our small businesses begin from the micro and to be able to move through medium to large. And I just wanted to add to what Minister shared a couple of other things that I believe would be helpful. We're currently working on the Collateral Registry. That's a work in progress. That is going to be transformative, where you're going to remove the limitation that a lot of MSMEs have in terms of access to collateral, to back a loan. You also have the credit guarantee schemes that you would have had access to by the central bank. All that will be part of the discussion, as Minister was discussing earlier, in terms of the discussions with Enterprise Growth Fund, fund access, etc. Another important area that will help our small businesses to grow bigger really is access to government contracts. Many of the currently large businesses grew large because they were able to access significant levels of government contracts. And therefore, we have to be able to use access to those contracts to be able to empower some of our smaller businesses to be able to build, and so that they can create more employment, and that many of them can build a sufficient resilience that they can begin to look at things like export. But one of the challenges that most small businesses encounter is the area of debt management. Debt management has been a terrible noose around the necks of businesses, and especially for small businesses. They're undercapitalized, they don't have enough working capital, they can't get access, and then you've got the debt strangling them, and they do not have a method by which they're going to escape. And that is why the Supervisor of Insolvency, her unit is extremely vital to helping small businesses, and the work that they're doing in association with other units to help businesses deal with debt management. This is what is going to be a major game changer, because it will free them up to function. And I don't know, Minister, if we could invite your Supervisor of Insolvency to discuss that area of debt management for the benefit of the Chamber and for the benefit of the country, because our businesses need to understand and know about it, to know what help is there that can put them back on track, that they can stay in the game, and that they can continue to be a part of the growth that will come to Barbados as we work towards doubling our gross domestic product. Thank you very much, Chair, and Minister, to you.
I mean, your hands, are you inclined to allow the Supervisor of Insolvency to address us at this point?
You may proceed, Minister.
Thank you. The Supervisor of Insolvency is Ms. Esther Springer. She does not have a microphone in front of her right now, but I can see on screen that the exchange is being made so that she can be allowed to have one. And she has just taken her seat in front of the mic. Once she is finished, then, Mr. Chairman, I would invite P.S. Jennifer Hunt and Ms. Tamisha Rochester to address the second question raised by the honourable member.
Good morning, ministers. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Esther Springer. I'm the Supervisor of Insolvency in the Office of the Supervisor of Insolvency. Our department is responsible for overseeing the administration of the provisions of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. As part of our work program for the upcoming financial year, we will continue to roll out our Dealing with Debt program. That program is aimed at providing assistance for indebted businesses and individuals who are going through a financial crisis. This program is structured in such a way as to allow us to, outside of the provisions of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, to allow businesses to for us to develop a debt management plan for them. They have to undergo mandatory financial counseling, and they are required to participate in training offered by the Financial Literacy Bureau in areas of weaknesses that have been identified by our office and by the accountants who work with us voluntarily. This area is one, as the minister noted, as both ministers noted, that is very important and is often overlooked. We are seeing our people as young as 23 and up to the age of 72 suffering with severe debt problems. We are seeing people with 8 credit cards using one credit card to pay the other. We are seeing businesses who start out, but because of a lack of awareness of what is out there, they are getting themselves in financial trouble. So to provide some context, I will use, for instance, a young gentleman who would have resigned from his job and decided to buy a canteen. And he would have found the canteen on a social media website. He would have gone then, obtained financing from a financial institution to purchase the canteen. The check is paid over to the proposed vendor or the purported vendor. When he goes to take possession, it is recognized that the person to whom he paid the money was not the actual owner of the canteen. And then he is in a situation now, he had quit his job, so he has no income coming in. And in addition to that, he has to repay the money. Now, of course, he was very challenged because he felt as if he should not have to repay given the fact that he was defrauded. However, it is these kinds of things we're seeing because our young people, and he is in his 20s, our young people are unaware of the implications of the contracts that they enter to when they access financial products. These are the things on the ground that which we are dealing with. So we recognize that we need to implement programs which allow our people to be aware of the scope and implications of the contracts that they're entering into. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that the supervisor pauses just to make sure that she has a little bit, find out how much time she has that she could elaborate further. The supervisor, I know, has a lot more to say, but I'm just wondering, sir, whether you could indicate how much more time she might be likely to have.
Honourable member, she can come again, just support
Okay,
this question. Or she
fair
can
enough.
Come
I'm obliged to you, sir. I would therefore invite PS Jennifer Hunt from the International Business Division to address that second question.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members, and thanks for the question. The Ministry, Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, and the International Business Division are all committed to the ease of doing business in Barbados. This year, we will be focusing on the digitalization of operations, where we will upgrade our economic substance system with a secure business licensing system. And for the Corporate and Intellectual Affairs Property Office specifically, they will continue upgrade of the digital corporate registry. With respect to the question on service standards, we are part of government's Commitment for Results program, and during this year, we will be rolling out the service standards for the section. This is part of the entire government's commitment, and we as a revenue generating section and one which interacts heavily with the members of the public will be in a position therefore to have our standards published. We are moving towards ease of business. That's our focus, and therefore we wish 24-hour operation online activity so that members can conduct their business with us at times convenient to them. We are focused on government's double-digit growth, and therefore whatever we can do in our power to make sure that transactions are done in minimal possible time and efficiently, that remains our focus. At this stage, if required, I can pass on to the Acting Registrar of the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office for further specifics. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, I just wanted to beg your indulgence briefly to just, before Ms. Rochester comes in, just to remind of the question, because it is specific about the transparency of those KPIs. Let me be very quick. I understand that we're online, but we have to apply a common sense approach to what we're doing. If I am online in an online environment and there is a bug or there's an issue with my online environment, there has to be a way to resolve it. I am saying this from recent experience. So that if we cannot say to the client, and I also encourage us to change the language from applicant to client, because we are serving our fellow Barbadians as clients, that, well, we are online now, and so we can't do anything in any other environment to address your issue. I want to hear from Ms. Rochester, if I can, Minister, about what are the very practical ways in which we are going to make sure that even as we deal with some of the issues that will arise in the transition, that people are not disadvantaged because of the transition.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I am Tamisha Rochester, the Acting Registrar of Corporate Affairs, and I will just give a brief history of what we have been doing and what we are continuing to do as we try to transform the way in which we do business at the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. Now, we embarked on implementing a full digital platform for doing business, and we were able to launch phase 1 of the platform in November 2021, and this phase encompasses starting new entities, so the registration of business names, the incorporation of companies, societies with restricted liability, external companies, etc. Now, we did not try to slap a Band-Aid on the issue by just implementing a digital system. Before we implemented the system, we embarked on an exercise where we deconstructed and we reconstructed. We brought down the existing processes, we found the problems, we found the inefficiencies, and we sought to re-engineer the processes in a way that are as efficient and fit for purpose as possible. taking into account the suggestions and feedback from the sector which we serve. Now, I take your first question in relation to the performance indicators and the KPIs, etc. We have, in fact, recognized that this was an area we fell down in the past, where there was no proper tracking of timelines, etc., which are important for the purposes of accountability. And we have factored that into what we are doing. And we have a method of providing the reports that we require that show the length of time taken on an application. It shows how quickly matters have been addressed. And the reports can be broken down in a variety of ways. So for example, I can share with you today that we have processed a total of 1,606 filings since we have gone live. And I can say to you that 80% of these filings have been responded to, actioned, or processed the same day the customer has filed that document with us. And we have those statistics which will guide us and which we will use to allow us to further improve our services. We also have the statistics relating to the queries and the issues raised by customers as we navigate this new system. And I will be fully frank to say, yes, it is a completely new system built from scratch, from the ground up, for us, in relation to our particular circumstances on the ground. And we have had some teething issues, but we've also put in place a grievancy module whereby customers can raise these tickets and whereby they can track the process of our responses to the different tickets that are being raised. And in many of the cases, the issues are, if they are of a technical nature, they are forwarded on to the technical team for a resolution and a response provided. Now, I just also wanted to say that we're not only looking at, as I said, putting a digital platform in place without looking at the other factors. And I can also report that we are also reviewing the underpinning legislation, which we started since last year by utilizing advisory committees comprising of subject area experts. And one of the major focuses of one of the committees is the Companies Act. And in fact, they have already started their review and made several recommendations on several areas of the Act. So it is something we are looking at comprehensively. We are not just trying to put a system in place. We are also trying to make sure that the processes are in place and that they are easy to use, and that we also bring along the legislative with us. So in terms of issues being raised, as I said, we have the system in place for these issues that are coming along in the transitional period. You would appreciate we've launched phase 1 while we are still working on phase 2. Phase 2 encompasses all of the post-incorporation, post-registration processes up to the point of dissolution or the end of the entity. Now, there are going to be some areas where the two phases may overlap. There may be some where you need to deal with a piece in phase 1. However, we've not yet moved that phase onto the platform, which we are working very hard to do so in the coming months. And in these cases, we would have directed customers on how to navigate as these particular instances arise. So it is not a one-size-fits-all for these circumstances. We have in place, I note your query about the issue of persons being disadvantaged as we go through this transition, and we have sought to put measures in place to reduce that as much as possible. We have from the officers who provide the real-time assistance and support, sometimes going as far to walk the customers through the process. And we have made provision for the cases where persons may not have access to make online payments. We still allow you to come in and pay at the counter, and then we can go in and ensure that that payment has been made. We have provision for those persons who may not even have access to a device, where we invite them to come in. And if required, we do provide someone in circumstances to sit with them as they go through the process. So we are putting the measures in place to make sure that persons are not disadvantaged as we try to improve the way we do business. And we just urge persons to look at the end game, or the result of what we're doing. We are in a transition process, but the end game is that we are as efficient as possible, and we have all of our processes streamlined, where we can perform all of our transactions same day or next day. A vast improvement from the previous track record of things being held up for days and weeks in some instances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member for Sir Michael West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to the Honourable Minister and his team. Given that this is the first time that I'm addressing this Honourable Chamber, it would be remiss of me not to thank the good constituents of St. Michael West for bestowing the confidence in me and allowing me to represent them in these hallowed halls. Not quite the real deal yet. I look forward to that, hopefully, in another month. No pressure on the Honourable Member from St. George South to get us there. Now, I also want to echo the sentiments that the Honourable Member from Southeast, St. Michael Southeast, and thanking the Honourable Minister in his job in implementing the trust loan scheme and also the National Vending Bill. The latter is near and dear to my heart, and the Honourable Minister will be happy to hear that I run a business that has been operating in the city of Bridgetown for over 100 years. So even though I have not been around for that long, I've been around for at least 15 of them, and I have seen personally the indignity and the harassment that vendors have suffered, specifically in and around the Cheapside area. And I could never understand why they would suffer this at the hands of people who should have known better, that they're just trying to ply their trade to support their families. Specifically over that time, a lot of them would have been laid off from the public sector, and their only recourse was to go out there and sell goods. So I want to applaud you, Honourable Minister, in bringing that legislation. Now this brings me to my first question, and this question applies to the impending legislation which will seek to modernize this country by adopting the system of international units. Now, obviously, these standards of units will be easier for large businesses and corporations to implement. It'll be easy for me to do. But again, the vendors may have some difficulty in this. As we know, there's a certain culture as it pertains to vendors, and their customers also just think in terms of pounds and not grams and kilograms. So my question to you and your team is, what is the plan to help them to transition to the implementation of these standards?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The House will be aware that there is on the order paper a bill which is called the Metrology Bill. And that Metrology Bill is simply intended to move Barbados from a state where we are doing our measurements in yards, feet, and inches pounds and ounces and the imperial standards to one where we just across the board utilize the metric system. The honourable member is quite right that in the context of commerce, larger players may find it far easier to make the convergence. I obviously have to pilot this bill, and I am very conscious, Honourable Chair, that there is a rule against anticipation of a piece of legislation, but there are some issues that the Honourable Member has spoken to that I think do require a very direct answer. The Ministry of Commerce, or the Division of Commerce in the Ministry, is keenly conscious of the potential for disadvantage. And one of the reasons why this bill has not yet been brought is that we are trying to fine-tune it with a view to building in a period of time when there could be some flexibility, so that we would do as with the vending bill, for example, and if memory serves me correctly, also the bill that speaks to liquor licenses, where you proclaimed after for a period of time after the bill had actually passed the House. So a time is set for proclamation after the bill has passed the House. And this will allow for us to have a time frame within which we can work with, as the Honourable Member said, the vending community, but there are other small businesses as well which need to be, first of all, made completely aware of what it is that we are trying to achieve, and secondly, to help them to be in a position where they are ready to make the transition. And this is perhaps a matter that has some underestimated levels of complexity, because what you do not want to do is to have a new level of standard being introduced that the average person in Barbados cannot easily access or reach. So just as the same way that we, with regard to the light bulbs, which are incandescent, would have worked with that sector to make sure that there's a period built in that you will then phase out incandescent light bulbs, so that people who have them in stock, for example, do not have to now change stock all at once, that we will have a way of structuring the change so as to minimize the impact. The Division of Commerce, through the Director of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, is going to have responsibility for this metrology infrastructure, if that is the correct way of putting it, and the work which is being done has already begun by interfaces between the Director of Commerce and his staff and the people who the Honourable Member is quite rightly pointing us in the direction of. I would want to ask Mr. Bertram Johnson, who is the Director of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, to speak to the House about that which is being done and what is proposed to be done.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Ministers. Good afternoon. I didn't realize that we've moved so seamlessly into the afternoon. So good afternoon to everyone. My name is Bertram Johnson, Director Acting, Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. And I will start by saying that the overarching objective of Barbados transitioning to a new modern legal metrology bill, repealing and replacing the Old Weights and Measures Act, is really speaking to the heart of what the Director of Standards spoke about building out a national quality infrastructure that will pivot Barbados to be more competitive, and also to grow in a way that the Minister spoke about earlier in terms of fundamental growth. And therefore, the new metrology bill will ensure that the appropriate level of credibility as well as confirmed accuracy of measurements are maintained. And these things are very important in terms of Barbados pivoting to be a competitive jurisdiction. And why do I say that? If you look at the national quality infrastructure that the Director of BNISI spoke about, there are 5 pillars. And the 5 pillars speaks to standardization, accreditation, certification, metrology is measurements, as well as testing. And the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs is a champion within that work of building out the national quality infrastructure. And the question more pointed at the Honourable Minister would have asked in terms of how are we going to assist people to transition from empirical to metric, which the world is going towards, is something that the Department of Commerce is going to work in tandem with the BNSI to make sure that there's a hand-holding exercise in this process. For example, 2 years ago, we would have started with the fisheries sector. And we know if you go to the market, you ask for fish in pounds. Can I have 2 pounds of dolphin, 3 pounds of snapper? And we believe that this sector, which treats to over 6,000 persons within the MSC sector alone, is a potential sector that can be affected by the transition. So what we sought to do is to do what we call fishing audits. We would have had an officer work with BNSI to go through some of the fishing sector stakeholders to apprise them of what was coming in terms of the new metrology bill, and the need for them to move from the empirical measurements to more the metric measurements, and therefore so that they can now get into that position or that posture that they sell not only in pounds, but they know exactly that they need to sell in kilograms and so forth. And therefore, the work of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs will continue with all sectors, as the Minister said. When this bill is being brought into being, there will be a transitional clause there that would allow us to work with people and stakeholders so that they can transition seamlessly and there will not be no disruption to trade, as well as to commerce. So this work is going to go far beyond just having a look at the empirical, the metric instead of the empirical. It's going to look at, for example, as we speak about building out the Barbados economy. One of the first things that we want to do within the action of the new metrology bill will be to work at prepackaged commodities. We can agree that globally, that prepackaged trade is one of the biggest trade in the world, and therefore the prepackaged machines must be verified and calibrated to international standards. While the BNSI would work with the calibration part with their stakeholders, the Department of Commerce will work on the verification side. And why is this important? This is important because when you get into prepackaged trade in terms of projects, you want to make sure that what you're selling is the correct amount to the client to whom you're selling. So therefore, you don't want to sell more than you actually think that you're selling. You want to make sure that the machines are so verified and configured that if you're selling 10 kilograms, it is 10 kilograms. And also it's important for the consumer because at the back of all that we do, we also focus on consumer protection. So we want to make sure that the consumer is also receiving what he or she is paying for in the economy. So in that regard, we will be undertaking in this fiscal period the program under the new metrology bill. We'll be looking at a prepackaging program that we'll be looking at verification of machines to make sure that when people are selling, the skills are actually so well configured and calibrated and verified by the inspectors that consumers are actually getting what they are paying for. More importantly, as we look to expand our trade through our various trade agreements with other countries, we want to make sure that what we are selling also meet the national standards, but also the conformity assessment to verification through our prepackaged goods are meeting those standards. So therefore, there's no technical barriers to trade that we will meet when we have those market access opportunities. So the work of the metrology bill will create basically a new impetus for Barbados to develop in the areas of standardization, in the areas of measurements, which is metrology, which is going to be critical to all that we do. I want to also say that the metrology bill goes just beyond the verification work and the enforcement work, but it also speaks to the health and safety to this country. For example, we'll be looking to verify basically medical instruments. And why is this important? This is important because it creates new revenue opportunities for the country. We all know that we have the Rochester University here, which is a medical school that have medical equipment that needs to be verified and calibrated. This becomes an opportunity now with the upgrading of the metrology bill to create new revenue opportunities for the country where we can verify a lot of the instruments that are being used at the Rochester University and so forth. So again, it is not just an enforcement and a compliance issue, it also proffers well for new revenue opportunities. We can also know that we live in a destination where we are considered a tourism destination, where cruise is a key component of our tourism product. Therefore, those barometers and so forth, those equipments that are on ships, they also creates the opportunity through this legislation that we can be doing verification of those instruments there. Also at the airport, where aircrafts land, we can be verifying certain instruments in the aircrafts that can see Barbados as a home port to do these things. So the metrology bill creates, again, a platform, a springboard in which the growth and development that we've been speaking to this morning, it can lend to those new revenue earning opportunities, which will continue to build out the diversification of the Barbados economy. More important, pay tremendous attention to the consumer protection, because in all that we want to do, we also want to make sure we have a balanced approach, not only focusing on the commerce side, but also on the consumer protection side. So, and we also know about, close on this matter, we want to reduce our climate footprint in terms of environmental protection. The metrology bill also down the road offers opportunity in terms of air pollution, emissions, and the standards and the measurements of those. The bill also is flexible enough to expand into those areas that we can pay more attention to our global footprint in terms from an economic environmental standpoint. So I would end by saying that while we bring this piece of legislation into being, it will be a hand-holded exercise. We will work with all stakeholders, that being the BNSI, who creates the policy, and the Department of Commerce, who enforce the policy. And it's good that we have the two arms under the same ministry working in tandem. And we will work with every sector. And as the minister said, there will be a transitional provision where we would make sure in that transition that persons are not left behind as we take on this new piece of work within the Barbados economy. I am so indebted to you and indulged. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister and Mr. Johnson, for a comprehensive reply. My second question pertains to the supply of natural gas in the urban areas, specifically the city of Bridgetown, constituencies of St. Michael West, which I serve, and St. Michael Northwest. Notwithstanding the Minister's comments of the global situation as it pertains to the conflict or impending conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and the Minister gave a pretty comprehensive description of that. Unfortunately, my average constituent probably will not understand the macroeconomic explanation or understand why they can't get their natural gas. So my question is there any plan in the short, medium, or long term to expand the supply of natural gas, especially in the Bank Hall and the Eagle Hall areas where there is adequate supply for commercial entities, and there are houses through the gap that unfortunately do not have access, and it's a little frustrating for those constituents. Is there a plan in the short, medium, or long term to address these issues?
I want to thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. And once again, I have to tell the House that the time has come for your Minister of Energy to take you completely into his confidence. We're in a very interesting state. I begin with this factually, not to make a political point, but it is just a reality of where we are. As we all know, there was a period of time in the 70s and 80s when we were doing onshore drilling and onshore exploration. That process has not been renewed over the course of perhaps the last 10 to 15 years. The reality of not having any onshore exploration or onshore drilling taking place has placed us in a situation where we are just depleting those things that we had before. In other words, we are using wells and the volume in the wells that pre-existed all of us being in Parliament right now. The fact of the matter is that in the context of natural gas, we have also to recognize that
while there is an ongoing demand for natural gas in Barbados, and while for the next decade or so, it is anticipated that there will continue to be a demand which has to be met. Natural gas is a bridging fuel. It is a cleaner form of fossil fuel, and it is a cheaper form of fossil fuel, but it is really only a bridging fuel that takes us into that era between, let us say, 2030 and maybe next 3-5 years after 2030, when the country would ideally be 100% fossil fuel free. So that for the short to medium term, there is going to be a continued demand for natural gas, which we have to service, and which we have to find a way of servicing efficiently and economically. But at the same time as we say that, as all of us are aware, we've just concluded a campaign where we are speaking to the issue of as much as 50,000 new houses being built in Barbados, or built or refurbished in Barbados, and that the vast majority of them will be fueled by renewable energy in the context of solar photovoltaics. And as I just indicated to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, batteries and battery storage, that is the new technology. So while my constituents, like yours, Honourable Member, would like ideally to be able to access cheaper forms of fuel to cook with, primarily that is the use in the households in Barbados, and while the restaurants would want to be able to access that natural gas and still do, and while the hotels would want to be able to continue to use it, and it has been used for air conditioning in the hotel rooms, etc., there is, and if, as I forecast down the road, there is going to be a limited scope or a reducing scope for the use of natural gas. Now, the question is, where is that delicate sweet spot? Where do we strike the balance? We accept that it is going to be a bridging fuel, and the question therefore remains, how long does it be the bridge for, and is it a bridge to where? The answer to that latter question is that it will be a bridge to us being 100% fossil fuel free. We have some issues which have to be addressed in this context. Barbados, as we move towards renewable energy, has also to recognize that we are going at a pace that the rest of the world has not quite been able to keep up with. And in this regard, we like to beat up ourselves in Barbados, but in this regard, we should be praising ourselves. The challenge, however, about our commitment to go at the rate that we're going is that, for example, we have gone faster in the context of where we want to be with respect to the importation of fossil fuel into the country than the car manufacturers or the vehicle manufacturers in the world have been able to go with respect to the types of vehicle which are being exported or manufactured even. So that it is true to say that there are some types of vehicle which are being used in the construction sector, for example. You have no commercial sale of caterpillars and those very large types of vehicles which are electric or even hybrid. That technology, to the extent that it exists at all, is still only in a prototype type of form. So that, to come more specifically to the question of natural gas, we want to have a coexistence between natural gas on one hand and the continued movement of the country towards renewable energy on the other. It therefore means that there has to be some commitment given to the National Petroleum Corporation and the National Oil Company for them to, in the short to medium term, continue to do the things that they have traditionally done. And that really does also include having some effort dedicated to onshore exploration. Now, it is a risky business, and let us be very real about that. It is not a whimsical or fanciful thing. When you talk about spending money, even though you do your seismic surveys and so on, you cannot say with certainty what lies below the surface you're drilling into. And therefore, you're pouring good money down a hole in the hope that you will extract. If you don't get a successful find, then that money is gone and gone forever. And in an effort to find that balance, we are saying equally that we want to accelerate the delivery of renewable energy so that we take as many households as possible off of the dependence of the bridging fuel, and as many businesses as possible off of the dependence of the bridging fuel. My concern is the identical concern that you have, Honourable Member, and I think all Honourable Members in this House, from the Prime Minister back down, have constituents who would like to have natural gas piped to their homes immediately. Practical reality confronting the country, however, is this. If I am going to take a main off of a highway where natural gas is, and I'm going to run a line in a different direction, I have to break up road infrastructure, which comes at a cost. I have to lay pipe, which comes at a cost. I have to then rehabilitate, which comes at another cost. And the cost associated with the natural gas is therefore comparatively far more than getting the houses roofed, or the roofs of the houses outfitted with the solar PV. The reason why we have had the creation of an aggressive and unprecedented campaign to get into working class Barbados with solar PV, and that campaign must unfold very rapidly now, is because of the fact that we want to make sure, as I said before, that every householder in Barbados, irrespective of your income level, is able to access the cheapest form of technology so as to run and fuel the household. Part of what the National Oil Company is looking at is also the bringing in or making available as part of the loan arrangements, the batteries, and also part of the structure would have to be the retrofitting of houses with electric stoves so that you no longer have the reliance on the fuel. These are all part of the transformative stage that we are in. And it is by no stretch of the imagination to say, no, there will be no natural gas. I am just simply saying to you that while we want it to happen, I could not honestly look honourable members in the eye, even through a virtual media like this, and say that I can foresee that we are going to be able to have an expansion program for natural gas in Barbados that will touch each of the 30 constituencies in this country over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. I cannot realistically forecast that. It may be possible for us to do some, and it certainly is desirable for us to do some, but the reality is that it is more practical for us now to start to think, just as we must start to think in terms of metric system as opposed to pounds and ounces and imperial measurements. We must now start to think along the lines of renewable energy and photovoltaic implementation, which can be done across this country in every village of Barbados, in every district of Barbados, and in a way that is perhaps more commercially feasible and long-term beneficial to that which we would be able to achieve with natural gas. That is really the reality of the situation as it confronts us.
This time for lunch, but we will resume once we come back from lunch.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that you do not report progress is under the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again.
The question is that I know do report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. Honourable members in favor, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. He thinks the ayes have it.
chairman has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:25 p.m. this afternoon.
The question is that this honourable chairman will be suspended until 2:25 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:25 p.m.